What's going on, guys? Hey, we're back. We got a brand new Cappy Army video, man. So this is going to be sick. It says Polish special forces are secretly fighting Putin. Now, I think we've kind of talked about this in the past in regards to different countries' volunteers coming over to Ukraine disguised as volunteers, but really they're getting paid by their government to learn modern warfare and help Ukraine and so on and so forth. Maybe that's what's going on here. I'm not sure, but I'm excited to watch this. I've met a lot of great Polish people here in Ukraine, including, unfortunately, the first person, our first KIA in Azov's International Battalion was Polish. So a lot of love for those guys. Do me a favor, please like, share, subscribe. We got a ton of new subs here, so thank you guys for all the love and support. It's important that we keep Ukraine on the forefront of people's minds, especially right now when there's just a lot of chaos going on in the world, man. And it would be easy for someone who is not in Ukraine or not in Europe to just forget that this war is even happening over here. So share these videos for me, okay? Grab a t-shirt if you want one. We got the Flamingos over Moscow and American for Ukraine. All right, guys, let's get it. Oh, uncensored content is in the Discord if you want to become a member.
Border. Armored vehicles smashed through the frontier from Ukraine into Russia's state of Belgorod as a force of Polish-speaking commandos storm into Russia. Gunfire erupts across Russia's border. Armored vehicles smashed through the frontier from Ukraine into Russia's state of Belgorod as a force of Polish-speaking commandos storm into Russian villages. The attackers are members of the Polish Volunteer Corps, or PDK, which are a volunteer formation fighting alongside Ukrainian forces. Among its ranks are veterans of Poland's special operations personnel, with reports that some previously served in elite units like Grom, which is like Poland's version of Delta Force or the UK's SAS, except their name literally means thunder in Polish, so they definitely have some BDE energy. They were the first to invade into Russia, into Belgorod, in a series of attacks in 2023, over a year before the Kursk operation made it the popular thing to do. And these trends...
I don't believe they were they might be the first recorded to invade Russia, but we know multiple teams that they were doing some deep reconnaissance operations in Russian territory, Russia proper territory before that.
Setter operations are set to enter a new phase as Poland's government recently made it official. It's illegal for Polish citizens to fight in the Ukrainian armed forces.
Huge shout out to Poland, guys. Good work, man. It's absurd to me that countries are still criminalizing volunteering for Ukraine. Australia is doing this. The US was doing it for a while, especially if you were joining this unit right here, Azov. Gosh, there's more. There's a ton, most African countries, any Russian sympathizer country. So shout out to Poland, man. Hell yeah.
Officially, they're volunteers acting on their own. Unofficially, though, they're bringing decades of special operations experience and skills to help defend Ukraine's sovereignty against the Russian invasion. And that's only one front in a much larger shadow war. Across Poland, railway lines carrying weapons to Ukraine are being sabotaged by Russian agents. Intelligence agencies race to stop confirmed bomb plots and assassination attempts. In the Baltic Sea, critical communication cables are mysteriously being severed by Russian operatives. Russia and Poland are already fighting each other in a low-key fight, if we need to translate it into millennial talk, but this deniable covert operations are designed to stay just below the threshold of open war. At the center of Poland's response is Grom, G-R-O-M, one of the most respected special operations units in the world. Their operators helped shape a generation of Polish commandos, and their tactics have become the blueprint for the volunteers now taking the fight to Russia. Today, I'm taking you inside this secretive unit and explaining why the shadow war between Poland and Russia is becoming one of the most dangerous conflicts.
Chris Kyle's on there, and then it goes to the vodka test. What is happening, dude? This is going to be sick, man. I'm very excited. Shout out to Cappy. Please show some love on Cappy's channel.
In Europe, leading to Polish commandos seizing those villages in Russia. Have you ever tried going to the Russian Ministry of Defense's official website? Parts of it are actually blocked and censored for the entire Western world. Same with China, a bunch of important information is censored behind firewalls. That's why ProtonVPN has become such an important smart tool to keep around for research. It routes your internet traffic through servers that are located in countries where the blocked site is accessible. With thousands of high-speed servers across more than 120 countries, you can now log into places where Putin doesn't want you to. My favorite feature is the VPN accelerator that boosts your speed by up to 400%, and because Proton is based in Switzerland, it follows a verified no-logs policy and is fully open source, so privacy is built directly into how the service operates. It also includes NetShield, which blocks ads and trackers, which helps keep your online activity more private. Whether you're downloading information from foreign adversaries' websites,
Looks like Hassan Piker right there.
working remotely, or just browsing on public Wi-Fi at the library, ProtonVPN makes staying secure incredibly simple. Protect your privacy, get 70% off ProtonVPN through my link, protonvpn.com/CappyArmy. That's protonvpn.com/CappyArmy. Now back to the episode. The Polish Grom are descendants of one of the craziest units in all of history, the silent, unseen Polish paratroopers trained by British Special Forces in World War II that actually airdropped into occupied Poland and waged guerrilla war against the Nazis. These guys were the real-life Inglorious Bastards. After World War II, the Soviet Union turned Poland into a communist country, so no more training from the British. That was until 1989, when communism fell in Poland and the country wanted to be buddies with the West again. At this time, terrorism was on the rise, and lots of countries were setting up elite units that specialized in hostage rescue. So the US and the UK were all too keen to help their new friends in Poland set up one of these units, and Grom was founded in 1990 to explicitly mirror Delta Force and SAS. The first cohort of Polish commandos were even trained in the United States, and the structure of the unit is modeled on the British SAS. Since these guys are trained by the best in the world, Polish commandos were even trained in the United States, and the structure
That's Ukrainian Digicam. That's interesting.
of the unit is modeled on the British SAS. Since these guys are trained by the best in the world, their standards reflect that. And looking at how they train, it's easy to understand why these were some of the first guys who hard charged into Russia. The selection and training is absolutely brutal. They go through one of the toughest survival, evasion, resistance, and escape schools in the whole world, spending days experiencing extreme fatigue and enduring long periods without food or water, all while being pepper sprayed, tased, and thrown into freezing water. A sadist's idea of a perfect night, or is that masochist? I can't remember which it is, I get them mixed up. But in between all of that, they spend hours training on marksmanship fundamentals and answering non-stop questions that are designed to test their mental acuity under insane levels of stress. Doctors are at their sides at all times to pull any candidates out that are experiencing malnutrition and are those that are at risk of permanent injury. So only about 10% of Polish candidates make it through.
Wow.
That's a serious dropout rate. Once they're selected, the elite best of the best Grom commandos undergo a training course lasting several more months on everything from high altitude combat to parachute jumps and diving, giving them a capability to enter combat zones in almost any way imaginable. They set up elaborate hostage rescue exercises using commercial planes, buses, and trains, and they practice raiding them hundreds of times over. Former Delta operator George Hand described training alongside Polish Grom and being, quote, in awe daily of their ability in a variety of special operations missions. The Polish Grom established themselves so quickly that just a few years after they formed, they were launching raids into Yugoslavia to capture Serbian war criminals during NATO's Operation Allied Force. Absolutely crazy stuff. But to really understand why encountering Polish-speaking commandos in Ukraine is a Russian soldier's worst nightmare, we have to talk about how Grom earned its fierce reputation. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Poland was the only other NATO country to follow the United States and the United Kingdom into Iraq, and it did so with the Polish Grom. The unit was immediately assigned a critical mission alongside US Navy SEALs. They were to secure Iraq's offshore oil terminals and prevent the Iraqi military from setting up their own oil infrastructure on fire like they did during the first Gulf War. So these terminals were massive, nearly a mile long. They were sprawling mazes like some kind of Call of Duty map that I'm pretty sure I played. Not to mention that they were essentially just giant, highly flammable bombs that could go off and cause an ecological disaster, not exactly the place that you want to have a firefight. Luckily, the Polish Grom and the US SEALs achieved such surprise on the defenders that the terminals were captured without firing a single shot. The operation set the tone for the Polish Grom Special Forces, their close work with the US and British Special Forces throughout Iraq and Afghanistan. So the Polish unit's level of skill and training so closely resembled the Navy SEALs that the two units would trade personnel freely depending on their operational needs. In fact, Chris Kyle, the famous SEAL from American Sniper the movie, was once deployed to Iraq to join a Polish Grom unit and serve as its navigator. He even had to quickly learn some basic Polish. In his book, he describes raiding houses with the Polish unit and how they operated at the same levels as the SEALs, saying that they had, quote, an excellent reputation in special operations.
That's insane, dude. I did not know that.
End quote. And that the Polish Grom were a lot like SEALs, extremely professional at work and very hardcore partiers after hours. They all had Polish vodka. Fortunately, the Grom liked to share, end quote. As for the language barrier, Chris Kyle, the sniper, said that what always seemed interesting to me was how well we communicated without using words, even on an op. They'd turn around and wave me up or back or whatever. If you're a professional, you don't need to be told what to do. You read off each other and react, end quote. When he was eventually reassigned to a SEAL unit, Chris Kyle complained about how the Grom unit were going out on so many more missions than his SEAL team. He even made sure to take as many of the Polish Grom's stun grenades with him as possible because he preferred them to what the SEALs had. On their snatch and grab missions, the Polish Grom were so fast that American Special Forces started to ask how they did it. Drago Desrian, a SEAL who joined them on some of their raids, recounts how when they captured a target on a building's upper level, rather than walk them down the stairs, the Polish Grom merely tossed them out the window to some Grom commandos waiting on the ground level. They'd throw the target in a Humvee and be out of there in no time. They were really earning the Thunder name and reputation for being brutally effective. That reputation was so good that American Special Forces guys started asking if they could join their missions just so that they could say that they'd been on a Grom raid.
That's pretty impressive, man. You've got what's regarded to be one of the top, let's say top 3 most elite military outfits in the world, which is the US Navy SEALs, basically in awe of, their words, not mine, in awe of this Polish Grom unit. Wow.
Throughout the wars, Navy SEALs said that they learned just as much from the Polish Grom as the Grom learned from them. They were described as an incredibly close group, closer than family. One key difference between the SEALs and Groms, though, was that no one ever knew the Grom operators' real names. They always used pseudonyms. Plus, they would flex on the Taliban between raids, or maybe they were putting together a spicy calendar. The Taliban apparently didn't get that calendar, though, because in 2012, they ambushed a Grom combat patrol. 80 Taliban fighters, 2 platoon of fighters, successfully surrounded just 20 Polish Grom commandos. It was a situation where any normal unit would have been in deep trouble. But the Polish Grom aren't normal. Over 3 hours, they fought their way out, killing 20 of the Taliban fighters. Only 2 of the Polish commandos were injured. Note to self, make friends with shirtless guys speaking Polish in the desert. Poland isn't sitting back and hoping for the best. It certainly isn't trusting the Russian government's declaration that it means no harm. Can't blame them. Poland doesn't exactly have a good history of non-aggression pacts with its neighbors. When the full-scale invasion was launched back in 2022, Poland was one of several NATO countries that had special forces on the ground training Ukrainian forces northwest of Kyiv already, the same area where the infamous 40-mile-long Russian convoy was tracked. According to some reports, while some NATO countries immediately withdrew their forces, the Poles went east, toward the front line in Kharkiv and the cities of Donbass. What they did over there, so far we just have to guess, perhaps sightseeing. Back in Kyiv, the Ukrainian defense minister was preparing to meet the Russians on the border with Belarus for early negotiations. He had some big cojones for flying into
There's Fedorov, the guy that was just ousted from the government, Defense Minister Fedorov.
the lion's den. And guess who was providing personal protection and transport? That's right, the Polish Grom. It seems the threat was high enough that someone made the decision to send in NATO troops to deter Russia from trying anything. They even traveled with the Russian oligarch Roman Abramowitz, who acted as an intermediary. That meeting, of course, led nowhere, but the Polish Grom has continued to provide close protection for foreign dignitaries visiting Kyiv, including the Polish president's visit in early 2022. Since those early days, Poland has been a lot less obvious than Russia in its covert ops, because they're covert ops. Yet, as is often the case, reports still leak out. One Polish officer let slip to a journalist that they, quote, worked out a formula for our presence in Ukraine. We were simply sent on paid leave. Politicians pretend not to see this. This is very similar to the same way that the Russia Little Green Men were sent into Crimea. But what it basically means is that Polish special forces have been in the country of Ukraine from the very beginning of the war. And according to this report, some of these Polish soldiers made their way into Ukraine on vacation and joined up with the Polish Volunteer Corps, or the PDK, for what looks like some recreational hunting in the woods of eastern Ukraine. A Russian soldier's face when he hears the trees speaking Polish. By the way, that logo comes from the Polish Death Hussars back in 1920, not that other thing. But damn, yet another Polish unit with a badass name. We couldn't do any better than just repeating the color of our berets. The PDK became famous when, over the course of several weeks in 2023, they launched raids from Ukraine into Russia's Belgorod Oblast alongside Russian rebel groups. At the time, Ukraine was preparing
RDK and the PDK. That's cool, man.
for its much-hyped counteroffensive and was stretched thin. A retired US general speculated that the Belgorod raids were to keep the Russian military on the back foot, while the Ukrainians prepared for their counteroffensive, which was launched shortly after the raids began. For these raids, the Polish PDK and Russian rebel groups used Ukrainian tanks and Humvees. I guess the Ukrainians must have left the keys in them, even though Humvees don't need keys. I do it all the time with my T-72 main battle tank though. Other than the Polish PDK, which obviously published this footage of its raids for everyone to see, and which of course the Polish government denies ties to, operations inside Ukraine are murkier. In 2023, retired US Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who served as the senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense in 2020, claimed while being interviewed that there were 20,000 Poles fighting in Ukraine in Ukrainian uniform and 2,500 that had already died fighting. But Macgregor seems to be the only person to quote these numbers. And how reputable or credible he is I'll leave it up to you. I should mention, however,
those are huge numbers, dude. I don't know about that. I'm sure that the numbers are bigger than we expect, but I don't know. 20,000's crazy.
That in Discord leaks from early 2023, when an Air National Guardsman from America published classified documents regarding Ukraine online, Poland was not listed among the countries that had any special forces in Ukraine. Also, shout out to that one Dutch operator being a one-man army. Now, if US intelligence was keeping track of the number of Poles with special forces experience who were going on vacation in Ukraine, well, that might be a different number. Beyond Belgorod, though, there are plenty of Russian sources alleging Polish mercenaries fighting from Kursk to Bakhmut to Sumy. But these stories are hard to corroborate. Their sources are sometimes literally an old lady heard Polish and Ukrainians took her village. Not exactly what I call credible reporting. In 2025, the Polish PDK disbanded itself, saying that it...
There's the White Rex right there. This guy right here. The taller dude in the all black. He's the commander of the RDK, the Russian the Russian volunteer fighters, who they had that it's not a prank, but what would you call it? Basically, there was a 500,000 euro bounty on this guy's head, the White Rex, and they played off like he was killed. And that these Russian operatives succeeded in killing their bounty, and then the Russian operatives, who were really just SBU, Ukrainian special Ukrainians like secret special service, pretended like they were the ones that killed the White Rex. They sent photos and all this stuff, and the Russians sent 500,000 euros to Ukraine, and then they released a live video of the White Rex back, and he's like, "Thank you for the money. We'll use this directly for our team that is killing Russians on the front line."
Its members would continue to fight in other units. This happened at the same time as other foreign units, including the largest, the International Legion, were being disbanded and integrated into different Ukrainian units. That presumably is what prompted the Polish government to recently legalize service in the Ukrainian military. Now, if Polish commandos are still taking vacations alongside Ukraine's relaxing and sunny front lines, they're doing a good job of keeping it secret. But the two countries' security cooperation is only growing. In April, they announced that Ukraine would help Poland build its own drone armada. They've cooperated on defense and technology before, with Polish companies like WB Electronics helping the Ukrainian drone industry, and the Polish-Ukrainian company PKMIL SA is now preparing to manufacture Ukraine's Bodina self-propelled howitzer in Poland. I'm sorry I mispronounced some of those words. I don't speak this language, but this new agreement will take the cooperation to a new level as Ukrainian drone operators teach Polish forces how they become one of the world's leading drone powers. The Polish Deputy Minister of National Defense even said Ukraine would be a good place for Poland to test its own drones in combat. For context, that level of aggression is a comment from the Polish government is extremely unusual and is definitely a sign that we are approaching a new phase of this story. In 2014, Ukraine was plunged into years of war as Russia backed a separatist.
I love this. You guys know that I've thought there should be European boots on the ground for a long time here in Ukraine, and one of the reasons being is because Russia does not hesitate to put their allies' boots on the ground. There's Chinese soldiers in Ukraine. There's there's North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. There's African soldiers in Ukraine. There's Iranian soldiers in Ukraine. It's not like they ask for permission to the West. Hey, can we bring 30,000 North Korean Special Forces troops over to fight Ukraine? No. So why would Ukraine wait around? They should be doing stuff like this. I love it.
This movement in eastern breakaway provinces. Things eventually settled down until they didn't, of course. The full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 changed the world, and in few places has it had more of a direct impact as Poland. War with Russia was no longer a thing of video games, it was a real possibility for Polish people. Russian troops marching west again sparked some PTSD from Poland, which decided to do everything in its power to support Ukraine. The two countries buried their dark and bloody history, and Poland welcomed over 3.5 million Ukrainian refugees in the first 3 months after the invasion. While women and children were heading into Poland, weapons were flowing the other direction into Ukraine. For years, NATO officers and military analysts have struggled to pronounce this Polish city's name, which is something like Rzeszów, but that's probably wrong the way I'm saying it. Thank God I never had to learn Polish. But this random Polish city no one had ever heard of suddenly became the central artery for Ukrainian resupply because it was the nearest major airport to Ukraine. I hope that the farmers nearby were aviation enthusiasts and didn't mind this non-stop stream of C-130s and C-17s that were landing there. While these planes were landing, heavy equipment and armored vehicles were being moved overland through Poland and into Ukraine. Poland itself was one of the main sources of critically needed armored vehicles in the first months of the war. It also provided the bulk of Ukraine's Starlink terminals, which had been absolutely indispensable to the Ukrainian armed forces and their ability to communicate. On top of that, Poland was a critical rear base for the Ukrainian military. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian recruits passed through it to receive basic training from NATO member countries. Poland itself has trained 38,000 troops. The ability to pass off training of its troops to allied countries was indispensable to relieving Ukraine's manpower issues. Ukraine's war effort without the support from Poland is a very different story. But Poland isn't just relying on Ukraine to hold the Russians off, it's preparing for the worst case scenario, and it's undergoing one of the largest and quickest military buildups in modern history. Acting like they stole daddy's credit card and they're just buying everything from South Korea and self-propelled artillery from American and German tanks to Swedish submarines and tons of their own kit, but the country operates 5 different types of main battle tanks at this point.
Wow.
God, I do not envy Polish mechanics and their logistics officers. Poland also pulled out of the Ottawa Convention that had banned anti-personnel mines at the beginning of 2026. Its deputy defense minister,
Because if the enemy is going to use these mines, why should we, meaning the free world, meaning the allies of the free world, why should we hinder our capabilities of defending ourselves by trying to hold this moral standard by not using anti-personnel mines? They're needed, and the enemy's using them against us. One of my best friends was killed by anti-personnel mine.
said, quote, "These mines are one of the most important elements of the defense structure we are currently constructing on the eastern flank of NATO and Poland, on the border with Russia in the north and with Belarus in the east." Of course, looking at a map, you'll see that Poland doesn't actually have a border with mainland Russia, but here is where we'll remind everyone that Belarus is a Russian-inclined state that essentially serves as a forward military base now, and there's also the Kaliningrad Oblast that is technically part of Russia, hence Russia using Belarus to invade Ukraine 4 years ago. That's only the tip of the iceberg though, because while Poland's conventional forces prepare for large-scale warfare, its intelligence and special forces are already fighting a war. It's a hybrid war, where fighting takes the shape of deniable covert action, essentially secretly doing stuff that hurts your enemy but which doesn't meet the threshold where your enemy can openly retaliate against you. Russia has been waging this
which is 99% of war these days. That's what Russia does all to every single Western nation. That's what China does to every single Western nation. Basically pushes them as far as they can to see how far they can push the US and Europe with things like cyber attacks and a whole bunch of different hacking and satellite imagery and disrupting logistics and supply. I mean, they do everything they can short of launching missiles and dropping, paratroopers into American or European land to try to prevent the West from basically succeeding in global dominance.
Hybrid war with increasing intensity. It used the anchors of fishing ships in the Baltic Sea to cut communication cables of NATO countries. In 2024, NATO foiled a plot to assassinate the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of Europe's largest arms manufacturers that is absolutely central to European rearmament. Alleged Russian agents have been caught making bombs in Parisian hotels. In Poland, Russia has used agents on the ground to constantly sabotage railways being used to send weapons to Ukraine. In one case, just last year, explosives were planted on a train track but were, quote, too weak to blow up the freight train that the attacker was likely targeting. The train's driver was unaware of the initial explosion, but the tracks became more unstable with every subsequent train that passed over them until the level of damage became dangerously clear. Russian hybrid warfare operations seem to not only target dual-use infrastructure, but also civilian targets. Poland accused Russia of burning down Warsaw's largest shopping center in 2024, making bomb threats against schools, airports, and other public buildings. Sir Richard Moore, the chief of MI6, summarized it nicely when he said Russian intelligence services have gone a bit feral, frankly. Some of these operations are so nonsensical that a former head of MI5 put it this way: they seem to be on an unsustained mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets. According to DFR Lab, Russia's also attempting to sow anti-Ukrainian sentiment among Polish farmers who are angry about Ukrainian grain that is undercutting their market. And in July 2024, 3 different fires broke out at cargo hubs in Germany, the UK, and Poland. In each case, Western security officials said that there was incendiary devices hidden in the cargo and that Russian military intelligence was attempting to conduct a practice run of targeting cargo flights between Europe and the United States. If blowing up civilian cargo planes midair isn't feral, then I don't know what is. For all of the crazy ops I just mentioned, there's 10 more where suspicion falls on Russian military intelligence in Poland, but there's insufficient evidence. They tend to use non-Russian nationals, often petty criminals, and the contact between Russian intelligence and field operatives takes place between several middlemen, adding some plausible deniability. Other times, Russia seems to abandon all attempts to do things covertly and blatantly test resolve. like when it sent about 20 drones into Poland in
Yeah.
December 2025. Now, this wasn't the first time Russian drones had entered Polish airspace or even crashed in Poland, and in this case and all others, they denied doing it intentionally, but in previous cases, it seemed pretty obvious enough that the drones ended up there due to Ukrainian jamming, causing their navigation to malfunction. So Poland and NATO tempered their reactions.
Here, we'll finish it out and then I'll talk about it.
In this case, though, Poland's foreign minister said, quote, "We think that the preponderance of evidence suggests that it was deliberate, and that the purpose was to test NATO's air defenses. It was just one of many signs that we might be on the verge of something far more destructive and open." So the story of Polish-speaking commandos popping up in Ukraine is probably far from over, but what exactly are they up to? And how have they kept their movements so silent? I'm your average infantryman, Chris.
Love it. Great video, Cappy. Thank you. Please go show some love to Cappy. So a couple things I want to cover, then we'll finish it up here. Number one, this strike into these like 20-something drones that flew from Russia through Ukraine into Poland was, and there was no backlash on Russia for this. NATO scrambled fighter jets, Polish fighter jets, French jets. They took out a lot of these drones, blah blah blah. There was no consequences for the Russians for this. I lost about the small percentage of faith and hope I had left in NATO. I lost it all at that point, because this proved to me that short of Putin walking up to the president of Poland, Donald Tusk, and slapping him in the face, NATO's not going to do anything ever. Basically, they're not going to do anything ever. This was such a deliberate attack, and let's say that it was not deliberate, right? And the Ukrainian jammers actually did spoof these 20-something drones, just these 20-something, and launched them into Poland with their spoofing software. Okay, that's still Russia's fault because Russia started the war, right? That's not Ukraine's fault. Ukraine is defending themselves. If Russia had never started the war, those drones would have never accidentally ended up in Poland. And we've seen so many of these drones in these bordering countries in Europe. And a lot of NATO countries. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that I do have respect for Poland in the sense that I do believe that they're one of the few countries that are really trying to help Ukraine and not get tied up in the bureaucracy of things. Even with Poland and Ukraine's rocky relationship from the past, they had big fights in the past. And still, like I said, I've known a lot of Polish soldiers here in Ukraine, and they are all in, man. They're professional. They love the Ukrainians. They see them as brothers. They want to help any way they can. They want to fight. So I do have respect for Poland. It's really, I think NATO, some of these countries being in NATO has really hurt the strength of the countries, because NATO won't allow Poland to go in. NATO won't allow France to go in and help Ukraine. NATO won't allow, well, it's really just those two countries that have shown any interest in wanting to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. So I think NATO's really hindered the strength of the West in that sense. Because I really do believe when this war first kicked off, I believe that there's a potential, because Russia came in through the north of Ukraine through Belarus. I believe there would have been potential for Poland to push straight into Belarus to have Ukraine's back. And if that wasn't the case, and Poland stood back and gathered its forces and restocked its military for a couple of years, I do believe Poland would be here in Ukraine in an official military capacity by now if they were not in NATO. And potentially France as well. I'm not for sure about France, but Macron, the president of France, talks a big game about hating Putin and the bad Russians, and believing that we need to do more to help Ukraine. Now, we hear a lot of this big talk. We need to help Ukraine. We at these big summits, these NATO summits and these G6, G7 summits, and then the next year it's the exact same conversation from the exact same leaders. We need to help Ukraine. This is not we cannot stand for this. We're going on 5 years of this with the exact same speech from these leaders every single year. So I don't know. It is cool. It is cool to see that there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. We've learned to this that the US has stuff going on behind the scenes. The UK has stuff going on behind the scenes. But in my opinion, the behind the scenes bullshit. Get boots in the ground in a massive public image capacity. I want to see Polish main battle tanks rolling through Kyiv on their way to Moscow. Stop the shadow games because it's not helping enough, right? I think the world needs to see a very strong allied response because what the world sees right now is bad actors of the world winning. That's it. That's my rant. I got hot on that one, dude. All right, guys. So let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. If you stayed this long, I love you. We'll see you in the next one.